Today we're looking at David as the king. And what does that mean for us? How does it impact our lives? When I was kind of looking about this and I was thinking about King David, he's one that this journey where he's about ready to step into that leadership role, something that I've identified with a couple different times. A lot of times I've identified with it because I tend to be an impatient person, tend to be one that God drops a thought, a vision, a dream into me, and I expect that that's going to come to fruition tomorrow, only to find out that there's this season of waiting. Many theologians talk about David's life and how old was he when he defeated Goliath, and all of them put him as kind of a teenager, almost all of them. I think the major consensus is right in that 16, 17 years old is kind of when he winds up defeating Goliath, which quite impressive, especially if you know some 16, 17-year-olds and you think about them defeating a 9-foot tall warrior. Rather impressive. But David doesn't actually take the throne. He doesn't actually receive the crown until he's 30. 14 years, 13 years, 10 plus years of waiting. After being anointed, after knowing this is what I am called to, and you just wait and you wait and you wait. And for me, sometimes those seasons of waiting, things just don't make sense. I start to question, do I even know what I'm doing? Am I even going after what it was that I thought I was supposed to go after? Am I even following God? Did I even hear from Him in the first place? Just sometimes things just don't make sense. It's like watching shorts, flipping through the phone, and all of a sudden, weird things. I don't know what the algorithm's deal is, but it wants to send me random stuff. Do I look like the type of person that really cares about knitting and weaving and crocheting, but yet it wants to throw me this thing? And for some reason, apparently I am the type of person because I watched this 60-second video of just these hands zoomed in on, what do they even call that thing where you do like a tapestry? It's like the big frame that, I don't even know what they call that stuff. A loom. So it's like the hand zoomed in on the loom, and all I see is this thread, and the caption above it, it says 30 hours and 60 seconds. And I'm thinking, you spent 30 hours doing this? Ain't nobody got time for that. But here's this hand, and it's weaving in and out, and it's tying off these threads, and there's different colors, and some of them are going several layers, and some of them are really short, and I'm looking at this and nothing makes sense. Why? Why is this thread only this long, and why did you tie it off on both ends in the middle of this tapestry, and why is this other one curving and arching around? And none of this is making sense to me. Until it gets to that moment for the reveal, and all of a sudden the camera takes a step back and you see this beautiful picture of a landscape with mountains and trees and rivers, and all of a sudden the different colors and threads being tied off and ended what I thought was abruptly, and others just lasting for an extra long time or going in different directions. All of a sudden, all of that weaving makes sense, because every single one of these threads has now fallen in its perfect place. And that is what David's life looked like. Because for years, he is running from Saul. For years, he is hiding in caves. For years, he is waiting for the moment. And yet it doesn't happen until he's 30 years old before that crown finally touched his head. Every detour, every delay was a thread that God was using to bring David into the perfect plan that He had for his life. And I think as we look at this morning, we'll start to see maybe a little bit of our own lives in there, and we can see how God does that with us. See, I've mentioned that I've been impatient at times. One of the times I was the most impatient was in that season of transitioning from assistant pastor into lead pastor of this church, because there became a moment where I'm preaching all the time. I'm doing all the outreaches. I'm leading all of our meetings. And yet the title still wasn't there. It was a time where I felt like David, because David's the one that's leading Israel in and out of battle, and yet Saul is still the king. David's the one that's helping to guide them into victories, and yet Saul was still the king. Now, there was a big difference between me and David at this time, because while David had Saul, I had Pastor Colette, so I had a great leader there. But there was still this moment of impatience, because I felt this struggle. I felt this struggle like maybe I wasn't where I was supposed to be. It seemed to take forever for me to take over. And I started wondering, why do I feel stuck? Is it because maybe I missed a portion of it? Maybe there was something that I wasn't getting. It seemed like the plan that I thought God had given me was starting to unravel. And then in those moments, that's when maybe you can relate to this, when you've felt those tensions in your life and all of a sudden you try to force your way. And if you've ever tried to force your way when the timing is wrong, you've dealt with the mess that creates. The frustration, the division, the confusion. Yeah. We've all felt these moments of tension. Maybe it's a job that you've longed for, or maybe it's a promotion that just seems out of reach for you. Maybe it's that relationship that is kind of broken and it's been mending, but it's just still off and it's not quite there. Or maybe it's just that goal that you keep chasing and you're going after, and yet it's not there yet and you haven't achieved it. And while all of this just seems out of reach, the pages on the calendar keep flipping and flipping and flipping, and you're just waiting. As a church, we know what it's like to wait. Sometimes you got to wait on me. Sometimes we have to wait on each other. Sometimes we're waiting on God to answer our prayers. But what happens when we stop waiting and we try to force things? We get a mess on our hands. You see, David's journey from shepherd to king, it should remind all of us, one, that we're not alone in this, that we are all threads of a bigger tapestry. And while God is weaving this picture in each and every one of our lives, He's also weaving us and knitting us together for this greater picture that reflects Christ Himself. And yet, through all of this tension that we experience and all of the frustrations, here's the kicker of this whole thing. When you look at the life of David, David didn't become king because he grabbed the throne. He became king. He entered into God's perfect will for his life after waiting and becoming 30 years old. And even then, he waited until the tribes came to him. So what if the delays that we experience when we are waiting, what if those delays aren't denials? What if they're designs? What if the secret to leadership and even the secret to life is not trying harder, but trusting deeper? Today I want us to look at this life of David, and I want us to see how this crowning moment where David becomes king can turn our own impatience upside down. If you've got your Bibles, I want you to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 5. You can turn there in your physical, you can tap there in your digital Bible. But in 2 Samuel chapter 5, we will start to see this story pick up after David has spent years in hiding, years in exile, all of a sudden, 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 1, it says, then all the tribes of Israel, note that real quick, just that it's all the tribes of Israel, because leading into this, the tribes had been divided. They had been separated. They weren't united. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also in times past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. Therefore, all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David's plan, or God's plan for David, weaving all of these threads together and weaving a divided nation into a united one behind David as king. There's such unity that winds up coming through here. But it's maybe something that we miss when we look at this and we think about what unity is. Like, just think about your own plans and some of the own tensions that you've got. If the plan that you believe God has got for your life, the direction that He's got for you, the goals that He has placed before you, if you're pursuing those and yet it is causing division in your life, that's not the plan of God. God's not one that's dividing, He's one that's uniting. And you look at what happens with this unity. First, you've got to look here in verse 3. You see, all the elders come to the king, right? All the tribes came to David, and then it says David made a covenant with them. David makes a covenant with them. Unity is not passive. It's active. It's something that we have to strive for. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3, out of the New Living Translation, it says, make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. This is mirroring what we see here in 2 Samuel 5:3. Mirroring that. And even they were united because God's Spirit uniting them. He drew them in. Unity isn't just automatic. It takes energy. It's something that we have to work for. It's something that we have to strive for. It's something that it says that we have to make every effort to keep. To keep the unity. That word keep out of the Greek is tereo. It means to guard something, to keep an eye on it, to watch it. How often are we dropping our guard when it comes to the things that unite us? Here's one. Think about this nation that we're in. Supposed to be the very first word in our name, United States of America. These United States of America. But for how long have we not been keeping the unity? For how long have we allowed ourselves to be more and more divided? How long have we just dropped the ball and stopped watching out for the things that pull us apart? For way too long. For way too long we have been doing that. You see what it says there, and I've got it up there on the screen. We bind ourselves together with peace. Man, where's the peace at? Where's the joy at? Where are the things that would really bring us together and unite us? Can you imagine how united people would be if there was a little more peace in their lives? If they didn't think that their neighbors were their enemies? If they didn't think that just because somebody disagrees with their political opinions, it doesn't mean that they hate them. Just because we think that maybe the way you live your life is sinful according to God's word, doesn't mean we hate you. Quite the contrary, we love you. We just want you to stop doing stupid things. I mean, that's the type of love that we have for one another. It's the type of love that my parents had for me as a child. They loved me. They would tell me, stop doing stupid stuff. No, it is not okay to climb up a tree and jump out of it into a ditch filled with snow. That's stupid. Don't do that. Hey, if you're young and impressionable, do not do that. It's stupid. I say this from experience. But this is the kind of unity and love that we should have for one another, to be able to speak into one another's lives and try to help each other out. We saw this last week where David and Jonathan, they were the friends. They had this relationship where they could do that and they could speak into each other's lives. That was an active thing. It took energy for them to keep the unity, to maintain this bond of peace that they had. And that's what we have to do. We have to work at peace. That means we have to be forgiving people. We have to be serving people. We have to be aligning our desires with God's plan. And David's life should show us that unity really flows from God's purpose. Unity in both Israel and even in Ephesus, as the Apostle Paul writes, that unity was so fragile and it required an active participation in it. But that unity is where God's plan is at, because God's plan will really unite us in things. And we have to understand that God's plan unites us. In Psalm chapter 1, verse 30, or 133, verse 1, it says, "Behold how good and pleasant it is for the brethren to dwell together in unity." These tribes, they were once divided by Saul's reign. Now they're rejoicing as one. Unity isn't just practical, unity is delightful. It is God's gift to His people. How good and how pleasant. You know what? That's a vibe that I want to experience. The good and the pleasantness. Because that's what reflects God's heart. That's what also shows God's power. Can you imagine if all of a sudden people were saying, how good and how pleasant is it to live in Iowa? Because there's just something about those people. For so long, we were known as Iowa nice. I don't want us to lose that. How much extra effort does it take to smile at somebody when you're seeing them in the street? How much extra effort does it take to hold a door open for somebody when they're walking into the restaurant you're going into? How much extra effort does it take for you to see somebody in the grocery store or at Walmart and they've got several things in your hand while you got a whole shopping cart? How much extra effort does it take to say, hey, you go first? How much extra effort are we willing to put together to dwell together? To dwell together in unity, to live in that good and pleasant life. This is what God's plan does. It brings us together in unity. We see that back there in 2 Samuel 5:3. Israel divided, tribes separated, coming together, approaching David, and David making a covenant with them. We're united now. We're together, and we are going to accomplish what God has for us. We are going to serve Him. We are going to follow Him. That is the life that we have. That is the life that God wants for us. A life of unity, a life pursuing unity. Our impatience creeps in. We start pushing our way. We start dividing. We stop uniting. Unity is not accidental. Unity is intentional, and it is by God's design. Embrace His plan and watch how division starts to fade. Watch how it fades. But even in that, where I say that we need to be intentional about this and make a little extra effort to keep the peace, to tereo, to watch over the unity that we have. What if that key to life that David comes across is not in trying harder, but it's truly in trusting deeper? Because that's the key. trust deeper, trust more. It's not about your trying harder. It's about your trusting deeper. That's what David winds up finding in those years where he's out there in exile, hiding in caves, hiding and fleeing from Saul. That he just has to trust God's plan and trust in God's direction, because God's direction will guide you to where he leads you. You jump back into 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 2. They said, also in times past when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. You are the one that's going to do this. You've done it, David. You were the one. You've done it before. You'll do it again. If I'm David, that's a reminder of, you know what? How did I do it before? I trusted God. How did I slay the giant? Not by my might, not by sword. No, but by trusting in his power. This is the Lord's battle, and he will deliver me. And because I trusted in them, I'll trust him now, and he will lead me. This trust that we have, the Old Testament talks about trust a lot. It talks about trust almost as much as the New Testament talks about faith. Why is that? Because Old Testament trust and New Testament faith are really synonymous. Remember what Proverbs says. In Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, we're to trust in the Lord with all our heart. Lean not to your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways, and he shall direct your paths. You see these tribes coming to David, and David confirming with his oath that covenant, them reminding him of what he'd done. They're affirming God's direction in his life. He's affirming God's direction in his life, that God's direction has guided me, that God's direction will continue to guide me. It's affirming that David's path was God-led, not self-made. And that's what we see in Proverbs, that our paths are led by God. It's not made by man. Proverbs 3:6, check this out of the English Standard Version. I like this little spin it puts on there. One time that I think it does a better job than the New King James. In the ESV, it says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. David didn't just get pointed in the right direction by God. God wasn't just showing up and he's like, hey, David, that's the way you go. No, God shows up and God is actively there directing and guiding David, and he clears the path for him. He removes Saul for him. He removes a giant for him. He leads him this entire time. And all of those moments in our lives, when you think about those, that they felt like delays. Now hindsight is 20/20. You thought it was a delay back then. Now all of a sudden, you see that wasn't a delay. That wasn't even a detour. It didn't get me off the path. It was God just clearing the path. This was by design that he put me there. It's by design that I thought we were slowing down because we needed to slow down because I needed to learn a lesson. There was something I had to go through. There was something I had to see. There's something I had to experience. The older we get, the more we see that as we look back in our lives. And yet the younger we are, the more we should strive to see it in the lives of these biblical figures like King David. To see that God did this. God's weaving this tapestry of David's life. And while some of those threads are being shortened and tied off and knotted, others are going long and others are going in crazy direction. This isn't even the same color I thought we were using. God's got a design. And he's the one that is weaving it. We just have to trust him. He's the one that will do it. Because God did make that path for David straight. He removed the obstacles of Saul. He removed the obstacles of Israel's division. And the secret to David's leadership was not in trying harder, it was in trusting deeper. God's guidance in our lives is not a mystery. We often think it is. We're like, I just don't know what God is doing. Yes, you do. He's doing exactly what it takes to get the job done. You may not know how. That's not your job to know how. Your job is not to reason why, it's just to trust him. It's not to try to figure everything out. See, God's guidance is not a mystery, it's a promise. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Stop leaning on your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will direct your paths and make them straight. That is a promise. It's not a mystery. He's making it clear for you. He's making it clear for me. Trust him, and trust him deeply. Yes, we see a delay. I'm sure David did too. Wandering out there, hiding from King Saul, trying to make sure that he saved his life. You know one thing I didn't see David do? I didn't see David try to speed the process up. I saw David being very patient. You know, David could have taken the throne a whole lot sooner. This is David. Do we think that he really couldn't have defeated and killed Saul if he wanted? Come on, he slayed the giant. He slayed Goliath. But he didn't. He could have taken the easy way out. But what David realized is something that each and every one of us need to realize. And that is that every single delay has a purpose. These delays are not denials. They're by God's design. You pick up in verse 4 and 5 of 2 Samuel chapter 5. It says, David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all of Israel and Judah. David was 30 years old. Starts out defeating Goliath at about 16 or 17. And after over 10 years of delays, he finally gets the crown on his head. Finally gets that crown. 30 years of persecution. 30 years of preparation. Through all the shepherding, the battling, and even the exile, it culminates in David's reign. God was preparing him the entire time. And David just trusted that God's timing is not random, that this timing is not by happenstance, but this entire time, what God has been doing is preparing David to be the king that Israel needed to lead them. David's son Solomon winds up writing in Ecclesiastes 3:1, to everything there's a season and there's a time for every purpose under the sun. To everything there's a season. I know we're in Iowa. We've only got 2 seasons, winter and road construction. But see, we're really used to these seasons. We joke about that, but in all reality, Iowa has 4 distinct seasons. We've got winter. You look out and it goes from everything being brown to everything being white. You get spring, all of a sudden everything becomes new again, everything starts to turn green, everything looks beautiful, the colors of the flowers, they're starting to show up, this is great. Summer, all of a sudden you question your existence on earth, especially when August rolls in, because you're like, how can it be this hot and be this humid and so hard to breathe? Why do I still live in Iowa? And then all of a sudden, fall comes in, autumn creeps in, and the temperatures cool down, and your hoodies start coming back out, and the leaves start changing in a span of about 1 week. And it goes back to brown again. We've got these 4 distinct seasons, but when we often think of seasons, what we think of is just the weather. But in ancient Israel, when they talked about seasons, it wasn't just about the weather. It was about the agriculture. It was about the seasons of harvest and of reaping. When they thought of that, that's what it was for. When Solomon's writing everything, there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. He's realizing we're not talking about just seasons because the weather has changed. We're talking about seasons because of the crops that we plant and the harvest that we wind up reaping. And see, we can see that if we'll open our eyes and we look out there in our state and in our culture today. We can see those agricultural seasons. There's a time to plant. There's a time to water, and there's a time to harvest. We see those. But we also understand that when it comes to the seed planting time, you can't be taking the harvest right then. The seed planting time has a purpose, and the watering time has a purpose, and the waiting time has a purpose, and then the harvest time has a purpose. Every delay that we have has a purpose. You don't get to walk by and throw a kernel of corn down in the ground and expect all of a sudden you're going to get a stalk that's 6 foot tall right at that moment. You got to wait. It's going to be delayed before you get the harvest. But there's a purpose to that. David wasn't crowned as king as a teenager when he defeats Goliath. David wasn't crowned king when he's a shepherd out there as a young boy. It took years of seasoning David before he was ready to be king. When I found in that time where I was wanting to step into the fullness of what God had called me as a pastor, I had to realize that I was still being seasoned by God. I wasn't ready yet. And it wasn't until the moment that I stepped into that role did one of the first phrases out of my mouth come out and say, "Whoa." I did not realize the weight of that role. And this was almost immediately I had this conversation. It wasn't like time had went by. There was just this moment. But I realized I was unprepared a year prior, 2 years prior, 10 years prior. I had to wait. And God was doing something inside of me. You see, His timing teaches us patience and resilience. For David, the waiting time wasn't wasted time. It had a purpose to it. The seasons were shaping him for what was ahead. And what does David do? He waits. And he waits. And he waits. And while he waits, he trusts. And then he trusts deeper, and he trusts even deeper, until the time that God finally brings it about. And then he continues to do what he did during the whole time. Wait on the Lord and trust him in everything. David writes in Psalm 27, verse 14, during these fugitive years that he has, he writes this psalm. During the time of that 13 or 14 years where Saul's coming after him and he has to go into hiding in caves, waiting for this time. During that time, he writes this psalm. And in Psalm 27:14 out of the New Living, he says, wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. It kind of seems like be brave and courageous. That seems a little odd, right? In between wait patiently, right? How does waiting patiently brave? I'll tell you how waiting patiently is brave. Because you're a coward if you try to think that you are stronger and better and smarter than God and you try to push your way into what God has called you to. Be brave and understand that He's so much stronger and mightier than you, and it is brave and courageous to wait on Him and not try to force my own way. It took bravery and courage for David to not kill Saul and push his way into the throne. If he had done that, it would have done exactly what so many of us have done when we've tried to push things. You would have created a huge mess. And you likely would have been called out by God and removed from any blessing. David waited. He didn't rush to the throne. He waited with courage, trusting that God is smarter, God is stronger, God is wiser, and He knows what's best in my life. And I will not be ignorant of that. I will trust Him, and I will wait, and I will wait patiently. The word wait in the Hebrew, the Hebrew word kivah. It's interesting when you look at that because that word, it says to wait, but it's really to bind together. And it creates this picture in the Hebrew, binding something together, like twisting the strands of a rope together. And it makes me think back, scrolling through and looking at this short about a tapestry of all of these threads being woven together. And yet David is sitting here and he's painting a picture in his fugitive years out in exile of waiting on God is like seeing everything being bound together because God is weaving my life. He is weaving the plans together. He is making my path straight. He is clearing it before me so that I can walk into everything that He's called me to be. And all I have to do is trust that even when I'm zoomed in on this and all of the threads seem confusing and it seems like this strand that I was on got knotted up and ended too quick and this one I don't even know where it's going. When we're in those moments, we have to trust that God is this masterful architect and He is weaving a tapestry of our life that has a beautiful picture of joy and peace, of a good and pleasant life. David's waiting wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was bravery. It was courageous. Because what his waiting did is it wove a stronger faith in his life. And it prepared him for his kingship. I don't know, maybe it's the human side of us. Maybe it's the human side of us that has been put in time out too many times that we just think that waiting is a form of punishment. Oh, you just sit over there in the corner and you wait. We think that's what God's doing for us. No, that's not what He's doing. He's not punishing us. He's preparing us. Trust the wait, because that wait is making you ready. So what do? Stop rushing. Trust God's timing instead. Trust His timing. I mean, ask yourself, what is it that I am rushing that God is still weaving? Listen for His voice daily. Listen for His direction. Listen for His guidance. Read His word daily. Pray. Seek wise counsel. When you've read your word and you've prayed and you still don't know what to do, ask somebody who's got a little more faith than you think you do. Ask somebody who's got a little more biblical knowledge than you do. Ask somebody who's maybe got a little more life experience than you do. Seek the wise counsel. And then understand that God's plan is going to unite us, not divide us. So stop tearing people apart. Stop tearing people down. Start bringing people together. Be an encourager. Be an exhorter. Be somebody who lifts others up and encourages them to pursue what God has for them. Start small this week. I know we all struggle with patience. We can be an impatient people. I know that we as humans struggle with patience. You know how I know that? Front and center when we're behind our car is a horn. And when do we use it? When we're impatient. Somebody slows down in front of us, honk. Somebody cut in front of us, honk. We're sitting in the drive-thru, and all of a sudden the car in front of me moved, and they didn't move as fast as I thought, honk. Setting at a stoplight, and it turns green. 1,000, 2, 1,000, honk. We're impatient people. So start small. Try waiting patiently for one thing. Ask God for one clear step this week. What's one thing that I need to be patient in? What's one thing, God, that I keep rushing and rushing through where I can just practice some patience? And then let us as a church become a beacon of unity, even more so than we are. Welcoming others in, not just into God's presence, but into God's lesson of patience. Let's show the world through our lives and through our unity what God's plan really looks like. Amen? Amen. Let's pray.